Okay, so we have the microphone back up. Sorry about that. We have a small signal issue on the channels, on YouTube channels. Just give us a heads up if you can hear me okay, and if you're getting this video okay, and we should begin the study session in no time. So we're just checking the Northeast channel and the national channel, World Church of Messiah USA channel, and World Church of Messiah USA Northeast. We are streaming in both channels right now. So hopefully everybody can hear me okay, and we can start the study session with no further delays. Everybody on Facebook, just one moment while we get this set up. There's a small problem with the signal. It wasn't going for whichever reason. Okay, so I think we're up in good. Should be okay. Well, it's okay. It's running. Okay, so one more time, I apologize for the delay in starting the study session. Thank you very much for joining us. We have a great study, continuation from last week. We've been studying Masaki Sama's greeting from September 1, Boundless Love. It was shared with us on this past month, and we're in the second part of that. So before we begin, as always, I'd like to read the sacred oath and words of prayer with everyone. Sacred oath. With great fear of God, we acknowledge that the Lord God is our true Father, the one and only God. We revere Meishu Sama as the model for all humanity and as our own example to follow. Meishu Sama, who was born anew as a true child of God, the Messiah, by receiving the divine will that God accomplished in heaven. We believe that Jesus Christ, who 2,000 years ago embodied the name of Messiah, the name most holy and high, is serving the Lord God in unity with Meishu Sama. And we regard the messages of Kyosho Sama, who reveals to us the will of Meishu Sama in this material world, as the sole, absolute, and irreplaceable foundation in advancing our mission here on earth. Words of prayer. God, I acknowledge that you are alive. Within me, you are alive. I thank you for nurturing me to be newly born as your child. May this blessing be shared with all. In the name of Messiah, which is one with Meishu Sama, I surrender myself to you. Please use me as you wish. You. So as I said, we've been studying the greeting by Masaki Sama, Boundless Love, for the September monthly service, World Church of Messiah headquarters, outer room. And we're going to do part 2 today. The hymn I would like for us to keep in mind while we do this study today, the following hymn of Meishu Sama that's also shared in this message. People of the world, hurry up and come to heaven, for I save you in this heaven, where there is no winter or night for all eternity. People of the world, hurry up and come to heaven, for I save you in this heaven, where there is no winter or night for all eternity. Here we can see that what Meishu Sama referred to as heaven is definitely a place not in a physical world, not a place that we can go to and see with our physical eyes and feel. It is very real, but it is a place where there is no winter or night for all eternity. So we're going to see that eventually as we read further into this material and how Masaki Sama reads into this hymn. I'd like to do a small review from last week. We started the first part. I've split the study into 3 parts. So we're going to do the second part this week, and then the final and third part next week. In the first part of this material, we were left with this question by Masaki Sama. Does the increase of these ways of being mean that Meishu Sama's purpose in leaving Jorei, nature farming, and art is being fulfilled? So he asked the question, right? If we just increase the amount of people who are practicing Jorei, nature farming, and art, is this going to be really fulfilling what Meishu Sama wanted? Is this going to really please Meishu Sama? Is that why Meishu Sama left this for us? And we saw that nowadays in our society, organic farming, farming without pesticides, healing methods, either raising of hand, energy healing, and the enjoyment of art is something that is very well accepted and becoming more and more mainstream. So he left us this question, right? If the increase of these people, right, if the whole world starts doing this, is this what really fulfilling? Is this really going to fulfill what Meishu Sama wanted, Meishu Sama's desire? And he says very clearly in the message up to the point where we read yesterday, I do not think so by any means. And I shared with everybody last week how for many years, for not understanding truly what Meishu Sama's message was, truly Meishu Sama's desire was, I myself used to think that if the amount of people practicing this art of Jorei, right, this physical aspect of Jorei increased, if the amount of people cultivating without fertilizers increased, if the amount of people enjoying art increased, we would be fulfilling our mission. But today, through going deeper and being guided by Kyo-sama's messages, we can see that Meishu Sama had something much, much deeper that he wanted to share with us. Something much more profound. Meishu Sama was using Jorei, nature farming, and art to guide us to this point, to this understanding and this realization. Masaki Sama continues, what if, for example, in the future, the time comes when the entire earth produces pesticide-free crops? Everyone says pesticide-free foods are better for the body. They are good for one's health. Ah, how great. With this, humans are living longer. Right? But if that were only to better human health, for the good of the human body, and if God did not exist in the picture, I do not think Meishu Sama would be happy at all. Today we have many, many methods of improving human health, don't we? We have many, many new types of farming without additives, without fertilizers. We have many forms of healing and people teaching how to use the human mind for the betterment of human health. But without the existence of God in the picture, without recognizing God, God's existence, Meishu Sama would not be pleased at all. Masaki Sama continued through that, right? What he is asking us throughout was, who is cultivating the crops, for example, in the nature farming part, or the farming aspect, agriculture aspect? Who is cultivating the crops, the fertilizer or God? Through nature farming, he was asking us this question. The growth of crops Is it because humans use fertilizers that crops grow and humans can eat those crops? It is not that. Meishu-sama wanted us to know in every way possible that God exists, that the main character who grows the crops is God. No matter how much we put our intelligence, our strength, the one who truly grows the crops is God, is it not? If God wants, there will be no crops, no harvest. Overnight, everything dies. Right? Some kind of pest, something comes along, something happens in the soil. There's nothing for us to cultivate, nothing for us to reap at the end of the season. And someone was trying to show us God was very alive. It is by the will of God, Masaik-sama continues, that crops are made. For this, I believe, he revealed to us nature farming. Medicine is the same. Is it medicine that heals the human body, makes it better, and sustains it? Or is it God? Or how about Jorei? He said that Jorei can be proven by science. Through the raising of the hand by a human being, they have the power to heal. What he meant when he said Jorei can be proven by science was that God exists. God can be proven. He said this with absolute conviction. He wanted to show us that science can most definitely prove the existence of God. Nowadays, we live in a very polarized world, right? Where it's either A or B, right or wrong, science or religion. But God created everything to show us God, for us to return to God, for us to be born anew as God's children. Even science to prove God. To simply say, he continues, humans have been raising their hands for healing since long ago. There are also things like energy healing. Through these, human health becomes better. This has no meaning to Meishu-sama. The ultimate purpose was not for us to just physically get better and live a longer life. As Meishu-sama stressed many times, to have a healing or some kind of miracle and not recognize God's existence, not recognize God, that miracle means nothing, right? Through Jorei, Meishu-sama wanted to prove through and through that God exists. This goes for flowers' activities too. Even if many people were beginning to arrange flowers and say, this is comforting. Oh, flowers are beautiful. Humans are amazing existences. I think this would bring no joy to Meishu-sama. And why is that? Right? What was Meishu-sama's true heart and purpose? Masaik-sama continues. Why? Meishu-sama said in his hymn, "O God, every time I see beautiful flowers, I think of you. I think of how masterful you are and how marvelous yet mysterious your skills is." Look at the difference in Meishu-sama's way of living and seeing the world. Meishu-sama's heart was so centered in God, in God's existence, very different from most of us. When Meishu-sama looked at a flower, he wasn't just enjoying that beauty for himself. That was not the purpose. He wasn't putting up a flower to make the room more beautiful. When he looked at the flower, every time he looked at a flower, he thought of God, how masterful God was, and how marvelous and mysterious God is. Meishu-sama was using everything around him to show us that God exists, that God is alive. Masaaki-sama continues here. He says, each time he looks at a flower, he thinks of God's divine skill. He felt God's skill that could not be expressed in words. And this was each time he looked at a flower. He said, every time I see beautiful flowers. Each time Meishu-sama looked at a flower, he thought of God. When it comes to art, too, for the world to become peaceful and most of humanity comes to enjoy art, to say this artwork exists or that artist exists, to learn and enjoy art on a human level is not the reason why Meishu-sama revealed to us the activity art. Meishu-sama wanted us to become divine beings, did he not? To raise ourselves to become divine humans, to raise ourselves to heaven, to live with God in heaven, to be born anew as God's children. It's not for us to enjoy these activities on a human level, with a human consciousness. He was guiding us to something much deeper, way beyond that. Meishu-sama says in one of his hymns, I will collect all works, all artworks that exist in the world and show you what the innermost part of heaven looks like. He said he will collect all artworks that exist in the world and show us what the innermost part of heaven looks like. Meishu-sama wanted to teach this to us. That is to say, he revealed to us the activity of art to teach us that heaven exists within us. It was not for us to know art, appreciate it, or be healed by it on a human level. It was a means, a tool for us to remember that heaven within us and to be able to return to that heaven. And you see how much deeper Meishu-sama's consciousness, how much more beyond the normal human perception of what art should be and how art should be used Meishu-sama was. What Meishu-sama was trying to show us. Meishu-sama wanted us to recall heaven. And he used everything in his disposition, everything around him to be able to do that. In every aspect, Meishu-sama wanted for us to remember heaven. To know that heaven exists, the deepest, most beautiful part, the most wonderful place exists. He wanted for us to realize this in every way possible and try to awaken us through works of art. Now, when I read this, it also brought me to think, in reality, how hard it is for us to remember that heaven within us. How hard for us it is to recognize that that heaven exists within us, that God truly exists within us. I think when we say God exists within us, we say it very lightly. And the reason why I say that is because Meishu-sama was using everything that he could, everything that existed around him, where art, farming, healing, everything that encompass daily life, hymns, his sacred words, to remind us and to show us that this heaven, a place much more beautiful, much more real, much more eternal than what we are seeing and experiencing, existed and exists within us. So how hard must it be for us as humans to truly accept that, to truly acknowledge that? If Meishu Sama had to use all this around him to bring us to that perception. You see that huge gap? Or in other words, how caught up we have been in human thinking, in human way of being and living, looking for a heaven or prosperity, a happiness of this earth, this moment right now in this physical world. So from this point, I like to continue on to the second part of the reading for this week. So one more time, in every aspect, Meishu Sama wanted for us to remember heaven. Know that heaven exists, the deepest, most beautiful part, the most wonderful place exists. He wanted for us to realize this in every way possible and try to awaken us through works of art. So, were we to do flower activities, organic farming, or raise our hands for healing, amongst other things, in an ordinary way, without God, it would be much better if we do just that as a nonprofit organization or something of a similar process. If we're not going to really recognize the true source of all this, which is God, where all this is coming from and where all this has to return to, which is God, then we're just a nonprofit organization. We're not fulfilling our mission as a religion. Our true mission of returning with all humanity to be born anew as God's children, Messiah. Right? It's just an activity without God. It's an activity void of its essence. But these matters Meishu Sama left for us, are they the same kinds of things that people in the world are ordinarily doing? Are the matters that Meishu Sama put his whole life into and left for us the same thing as what the world talks about to the general public on the arts, farming, and human life? There are also the sacred grounds, prototypes of paradise on earth. We are on the sacred grounds right now. But what did Meishu Sama want the people who visited the sacred grounds to feel? That is a prototype of paradise on earth. So actually, as I am saying, he wanted to show us what the innermost part of heaven looks like. Through the sacred grounds, he wanted us to remember that heaven exists within us. For many years, I even lived in the sacred grounds for about a year when I was in Japan. For many years of my life, to me, though the sacred grounds are a prototype of heaven, as Meishu Sama clearly stated, a prototype, for me, for many years, those places were heaven. Right? They were heaven on earth. But I could not perceive that they were there to remind us that the true heaven exists within us. And that true heaven is within our hearts. So as Masaaki-sama says, right, when he gave this reading, they were at the sacred grounds when this happened, in the hall at the sacred grounds, the headquarters. But did Meishu-sama want people to just go there and enjoy how beautiful the place is? Enjoy to their delight? And remain at a human level? Or did he want more? As with Jorei, as with nature farming, as with beauty, as with the sacred grounds himself, Meishu-sama was trying to remind us that heaven existed within us. What the innermost part of heaven looks like through the sacred ground. Real heaven. For us to just come here and say, ah, how pretty it is not it? I'm sorry. Ah, how pretty it is not it. He wanted us to feel, ah, actually, there's an even more wonderful heaven in the spiritual world. I believe that Meishu-sama is saying, it is there, isn't it? It exists within you, doesn't it? Wishing for us to awaken to that heaven within us, he dedicated himself completely to the construction of the sacred ground. Reading this part, it makes me even more conscious of how difficult it is for us humans to recognize this true heaven within us. Meishu-sama dedicated his whole life constructing these sacred grounds to remind us that this heaven exists within us. For us to perceive that the true sacred grounds exist within us. God truly is alive within us. Meishu-sama, through every means possible, wanted us to know that within us, heaven exists. God exists. God grows and nurtures everything and sustains our bodies. Meishu-sama brought this to our attention with earnestness. Every means possible. Meishu-sama used every waking breath. Right? We know that Meishu-sama didn't waste time. He was very, very strict about time, was he not? Because he was using every moment, every second, every breath to remind us that heaven exists, that God exists, that God grows and nurtures everything and sustains our body. Does God exist or not? Does heaven exist or not? Meishu-sama was asking us these questions. How about you watching this study right now? Can you, like Meishu-sama, recall every moment that God exists? Through every thought, through every emotion. Can you recall that heaven exists within us God's heaven exists within us? I myself have a hard time doing that every moment. I'm working toward it. That's how Meishu Sama lived. Every moment, every breath, Meishu Sama was recognizing that God exists. Heaven exists within him. And Meishu Sama was asking us these questions. Can you recognize it? Do you accept that? I think it changes everything about life. Once we start recognizing that God exists, that heaven exists, it changes everything. How we live our life, does it not? If we were going through some kind of situation that is generating a very uncomfortable feeling, uncomfortable thoughts, if we are recognizing at that moment that God exists, that heaven exists, then there's a purpose for what we're going through. Is there not? But if we're going through that very uncomfortable situation, right? Many dark thoughts, and we don't recognize that God exists, that heaven exists, then we are bound to our human way of thinking. We are suffering in this world, suffering in this life with no way out. It becomes a huge problem instead of something that has a purpose to be fulfilled. And when we start looking at all the problems, all the situations around us, if we are void of this truth that God exists, then we have no solution. We are always, it's like we're trying to catch our breath to live through that situation, that problem, because we can't see that God is alive, that heaven exists within us. Is it not? So this Jorei, nature farming or art, now that we know Meishu Sama's purpose in leaving them for us, from here on too, are we going to continue saying we still want miracles, lots of miracles? Make this and that place more beautiful, more and more. In this way, are we going to continue seeking only the joy and prosperity of this earth? At first, when I heard several years ago, I think it was, about Kyoshu Sama talking about the joy and prosperity of this earth, I had a hard time perceiving what that meant, right? What does it mean by the joy and prosperity of this earth, heaven of this earth? But now, it makes a lot more sense, especially reading this message. It makes it really clear. We are always seeking a joy right now, this lifetime, this moment. Prosperity in this lifetime, this moment. What I can attain and achieve physically right now. Right? What I can possess or gain in this lifetime, in this earth right now. And we limit our search for joy, for prosperity to this limited lifetime of maybe 80, 90, 100 years that we're on this planet. And we lose sight of true prosperity, true joy that is in God, that exists in God. Right? Because God, who is alive within us and exists within us, is eternal, infinite. And prosperity to God is infinite. God's prosperity, God's joy is infinite. One with God. God's peace is infinite. And here we are seeking for a more pleasurable experience on this earth, a more prosperous experience on this earth, instead of seeking eternal prosperity, eternal joy that God holds. So it makes a lot more sense now, right? Now that we know Meishu Sama's true wish for us, which was to know that God exists, that heaven exists, which was to return to God, to this heaven, live with God in this heaven. How can we continue to seek this temporary joy? How can we continue to seek this temporary prosperity when there's something so much greater waiting for each one of us? So much better awaiting for each one of us. So, as Masaki-sama says, I do not think so. You cannot continue seeking the joy and prosperity of this earth. If Meishu-sama's purpose in leaving those matters for us to awaken to God in heaven, that would mean we must first, before anything else, say in our thoughts to Meishu-sama, God exists. Heaven certainly exists within me. This would be the way to respond to the will of Meishu-sama, who left for us nature farming, Yorei, and art, wouldn't it? So in order for us to awaken God in heaven, we must first, before anything else, say in our thoughts to Meishu-sama, God exists. Heaven certainly exists within me. You can do it right now as we're watching this study session. Voice that out to Meishu-sama. Within you, recognizing that God exists and heaven exists within us. It might seem a little silly, right, to have to say that to you, but it's not. It's crucial, extremely important to remind ourselves God exists. Heaven exists within me. It's surprising how many times during the day we forget that. We get caught up in all these thoughts, all these feelings that we're experiencing, and we forget that most important point, God exists. Heaven exists within me. And when we forget that, we forget why we're experiencing those thoughts and those very same feelings. So right now, I suggest, say it to yourself. Express that out to God and Meishu-sama. We're alive within you. God exists. Heaven certainly exists within me. This is the way for us to respond to the will of Meishu-sama. We all want to follow Meishu-sama, right? So let's respond to Meishu-sama's will. God exists. Heaven exists within me. Heaven certainly exists within me. And this Meishu-sama, as all of you know, when he received the purification of a brain hemorrhage on April 19, 1954, there was something that he said over and over. That is, Yorei is not so important anymore. From now on, we enter the world of Sone. He said this repeatedly. We might think that these words, Yorei is not so important anymore, means this only has to do with Yorei. It is only Yorei that is not so important anymore. But he says, from now on, we enter the world of Sone. In other words, he's saying that from now on, It is not the visible, but the invisible heart that will be most important. So him saying Jorei is not so important anymore does not apply only to Jorei. Every physical thing, activity becomes secondary. The invisible, which is our thoughts, our feelings, our mind, One, is most important. Everything will be done through the invisible heart. The invisible heart is the most important. So by us serving God through this invisible heart may apparently seem like nothing's happening, but everything will be done through that. And how powerful that is, I think we cannot even begin to conceive, understand that. What Meishu Sama wanted to say was that it is not just Jorei, but such matters like nature farming and art too. It is not through visible things or through activities with form that salvation will advance. What Meishu Sama wanted to say was that it is not just Jorei, but such matters like nature farming and art too. It is not through visible things or through activities with form that salvation will advance. I think I shared last study session, or maybe it was a different study session. For years, I thought, right, as a church, we could develop many activities and reach out to the community. And the focus was to reach out to people, helping them in their needs in the community, and somehow get this message across, right? But in my mind, the importance was in the activity itself, right? The activities that we were going to develop or do within the community. Nowadays, I see it completely the opposite, right? How much more I need to give attention to the Sone, right? Invisible, the thoughts and feelings that we are having, and how to serve God through that. Doesn't mean that we can't do any of those activities, but the main focus is not the activity, but the thought, the Sone, and serving God through that Sone. Right? So, as Masaksama said earlier, right? Were we to do any activities, any flower activities, or any other activities, with what Sone? Are we aware that God is alive? That we are here to recognize that God is alive, that heaven exists within us, that we must return everything to God who is alive within us. It makes a huge difference, or else it just becomes regular nonprofit activity. Nonprofit way to keep going, right? Community service. You need to go beyond that. We need to recognize how important this invisible heart is to God. What God wants that from us. Rather, since Meishu Sama said we entered the world of Sone, God would be advancing salvation through our Sone and our hearts from now on. I understand that this is what Meishu Sama was speaking about. God will be advancing salvation through our Sone and our hearts from now on. That means that every thought we have, every feeling we have is of extreme importance to God, is it not? For God's purpose. for God's salvation. Look how much more attention we need to put every day in our thoughts and our feelings. That's hard. We go by the whole day. Most of the time, it's just we go by the steps. We go by the routine. And we forget to analyze and see thoughts and feelings at that moment. Serve God with. We not? Depending on the person, some may say that that is not what it means. But now, for example, in this situation with the coronavirus, if in actuality the power to heal shown by the raising of the hand was still Meishu Sama's purpose of divine work, by nature, now should be the time to do just that. Right? If Meishu Sama really didn't believe that Jorei is not as important now, from now on we enter the world of Sone, then the physical act of Jorei should be the way to deal with the situation, right? With the coronavirus. But what if you start going to the hospital? Raise your hand to give Jorei. Are you going to be able to go into the ICU to do such practice? No, not even family members nowadays can get there. But we can truly serve all these people without having the need to physically raise our hand or even physically be present. That's how powerful God's light is, how infinite God's light is. It exists within us. And we can return all that to God within us without even ever having to go out the door. However, if we do that kind of thing now, it would likely be considered a problem by society, or we would be attacked by the media. And in certain cases, status as a religious corporation may be revoked. Then it would not even be possible for us to do religious activities. Or there is the issue of rejecting medical treatment because of toxins in medicine. When the government says to diligently take medicine or get injections, saying no and stubbornly rejecting medical treatment because of toxins in medicine may put us through the same fate. We may be isolated from society. As such, seeing that these times have come, indeed, I believe that Meishu Sama foresaw decades before, the world from now on, in the world of the tangible, will change in various ways. Meishu Sama had already foresaw that, had already seen how limited this physical way of salvation was. For from now on, God will be advancing his very own salvation using our hearts, the heart which is not visible. He certainly must have sensed this. So isn't that why he left us these words? Jorei is not so important anymore. From now on, we enter the world of Sone. Jorei is not so important anymore. From now on, we enter the world of Sone. For us, followers of Meishu Sama, what a shocking message. Is it not? For us who heard this for the first time, must have been very shocked. Many of us were. But Meishu Sama was moving along with the time. In a way, if you allow this kind of analogy, he was upgrading the software. Right? You have a phone, but if you run it with the first version of the software, years and years later, that phone just stops functioning, right? Stops working. You have to upgrade the software. You have to upgrade the hardware many times. Right? Our hardware was totally upgraded, right? We went from physical Jorei to Sone, right? From physical form to an invisible form. And now we are upgrading the software. how we serve through that, right? Our understanding of that, and going deeper to truly fulfill Meishu-sama's wish, God's will. However, Meishu-sama foresaw these times, and for our sake, for the sake of true salvation, I believe that he left us this message. So, what exactly is the salvation through our hearts? Right? That's the question. You know now that Meishu-sama said we're in the world of Soni. We have to serve God through Soni. What exactly does that mean? Until now, it was salvation of the visible world. But he said, from now on, we enter the world of Soni. So, were you to ask how salvation should advance in this world of Soni, that is, as Kyoshi-sama is always explaining to us, there are many people who are within us. Right? Meishu-sama says we're the sum total of all our ancestors. Kyoshi-sama is saying there are many people who are within us. How we were born on this earth was not by our own power, was it? Many ancestors existed, and so we exist. Those ancestors lived until today while bearing grudges or envying others, killing or being killed, and the like. It's an accumulation of all humanity for us to be here today. Those feelings, those ancestors are still very alive within us. We're not individual, even though we're trained to think very individual, very separate from one another. We are the sum total of all of them. Those impurities have accumulated within our hearts, and they come to the surface of our hearts every day, don't they? When we were told such and such by someone and feel we have to give it back to them, or uglier thoughts, uglier. We may have thoughts and feelings so ugly that they cannot be put into words. These well up from our hearts. But God is not saying that this is our fault. God is saying, aren't those kind of thoughts within you what humanity has left behind from their lives? Because I am illuminating that with my light now, I want you to carry them along with you and bring them to me, bring them back to heaven. I had a very interesting experience speaking with one member fairly recently. And as I was talking to this person said, as I surrender, I feel myself having more aggressive thoughts, more short-tempered. And that's not me. I'm not that type of person. I'm usually calm, relaxed. Why am I feeling this? Right? And talking to her, it's exactly this. It's not just our thoughts. It's not just our feelings. It is the thoughts and feelings of many thousands of ancestors are alive within us. And God's shining His light at that very moment for those very thoughts and feelings to return to God. For us to return to heaven. At that moment, when we are surrendering those thoughts and feelings, there are thousands of souls who are returning to God's heaven, who are receiving this true salvation, who God is nurturing to be born anew as His children also, along with us as we return. That is why it's so important for us to understand how this world of Soni works, how this mechanism works, for us not to get caught up in those thoughts and feelings that we are feeling. Kyoshi-sama is talking about it like this now, but this is not by any means a matter that only he is talking about. Meishu-sama also talked about this. That part we're going to pick up next week. I'd just like to take these last 3 minutes to share a question that was asked last week during our study in Portuguese. Somebody asked, and I think we've had this question before, but somebody asked, what's the difference between making people happy and making God happy? Are they not the same thing? And of course, we could do a whole study on the subject, but very briefly, just looking into it, because I promised I'd address it this week. We learned that by making others happy, we would make God happy, right? And I think that we need to first ask ourselves, what is happiness to God, right? Because to bring joy to someone, of course, is much better than hurting someone. God doesn't want us to be hurting each other, I'm sure, right? But to bring joy to someone in this earthly type of understanding, human type of understanding of what joy is, I believe is very superficial and limited to what true joy to God is. As we're learning, true joy to God, true happiness to God, is us being born anew as His children. It's for us to live in heaven with God as His children. That's true happiness to God, right? So if we seek to make others truly happy in the terms of what happiness is to God, I believe that's going to be very pleasing to God. That's what God wants. So every thought, every feeling, recognizing that there are many souls, many people connected to us, it's an opportunity for us to make that person truly happy and God happy, those souls truly happy, God happy, by surrendering them back to God through the name of Messiah, right? But if we just seek to make that person happy, a temporary happiness, to bring some kind of short joy, not really that person becoming a child of God, Messiah, simply, I want to please this person, I don't think that's truly going to please God, right? Because we're not fulfilling what we're really here for. Right? We're not really seeking God's happiness for that person. We're seeking what we think will bring joy to that person. So we're centering our attitudes, our thoughts, our way of being in a very human-centered way of living, right? And that's basically how we've been living our lives up to now, right? That's one of the biggest problems we have when we're feeling all these thoughts and all these feelings that we have from all these souls. What we try to do usually is even bring that joy, happiness to ourselves, what we understand as joy and happiness. And so if I'm feeling a very dark feeling, I want to negate that. And I want to change that to a happy feeling. And I want to live a happy life, happy daily life. And I try to use feelings and thoughts to live life as I see fit, what would be nice to me. And in that process, as we've done that, we've created a constant conflict with each other and within ourselves, trying to live a life based on what we think happiness. So when we recognize that, okay, true joy to God, true happiness to God is for me to be born anew as a child of God. We understand what that happiness is. Even though we don't know what that feels like, we know that for us to be born anew as children of God is what's truly going to make God happy. Then we can work through every situation, every thought, every feeling, every interaction, surrender all that back to God, along with all those connected to that, back to God. That will bring true happiness to that person, true happiness to God. Eventually, we will all be born anew as children of God, Messiah. I believe that's true happiness. That's what it means by making others happy, right? To please God, right? It's God's happiness, right? So we have to surrender ourselves back to God. And that goes with every thought and feeling we're having, right? Every thought and feeling we're having, there are millions of souls connected to that. For us, surrender back to God. God is illuminating our hearts for us to return to God, right? God's not illuminating our hearts, showing us those feelings so we can try to change those feelings to something we want to feel. He's illuminating that so we can return to heaven, to God's light. can be live with God in that heaven on a daily basis through every thought, through every feeling. I believe that's what it means. So it's the same if it's God's happiness. It's different if we're just seeking our joy. I'll leave it at that. I know we went over a couple minutes, but I look forward to continuing part 3 next week. Tomorrow we'll be doing the study session in Portuguese. I hope you can join us and join us in the morning prayers, because we're doing this material also in the morning prayers, and we're having a lot of opportunity for further insight also through the other ministers also daily as we're studying into this greeting from Masaksama. Thank you for joining us. And if you have any comments, if you'd like to add anything or questions, please leave it in the comments, and we look forward to addressing it next week if possible. Thank you so much, and have a great evening.